Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, April 30th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk Avengers Endgame spoilers. So if you have not seen the final installment of the Marvel Infinity Saga, do not listen to this podcast. You have been warned. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So, Chris has a review for this movie on the site. But, Chris, what is your brief thoughts on Avengers Endgame?
It's good. I liked it a lot more than Infinity War. I really liked how conclusive it felt. I mean, obviously, it's not the end of the MCU, but it, unlike a lot of the other movies in the MCU, this movie felt like, for lack of a better term, a movie to me. It had a clear beginning and it had a clear ending. It didn't just, the ending wasn't just like, get ready for what's coming next. It actually closed a lot of stories off, and I really liked that about the movie.
By the way, Chris, I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast that like the Marvel movies, and they were so happy that you gave this a good review. And then in your brief review, it seemed like you were trying to troll them.
No. First of all, no. There's no trolling in my writing, and I get very angry when people say that. I'm just giving you my honest opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Brad, you also did a spoiler review, which you can find on the site. I'm going to link both of these in the show notes. What did you think of this movie?
Yeah, I love this movie. It is a miracle of a movie. It's this incredible culmination of all these Marvel movies that, resolves character threads from previous movies, but also gives the heroes something to go through within this finite space that is just the installment of Endgame. Like Chris says, it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it really has important arcs for the characters within this single movie, but it also does a fine job of ending what has come for these characters in the preceding installments. And it has everything you would ever want from a big, blockbuster spectacle like this. It has huge action. It has a big beating heart. It has genuine emotion. It's very funny. And it's one of the most memorable theatrical experiences that I've ever had. It's just something that I enjoyed thoroughly.
Yeah. The Back to the Future trilogy is some of my favorite films, and this reminds me a lot of Back to the Future 2 in many ways, in that, it involves time travel. Also, it feels like a bunch of different movies. Like, that first 45 minutes feels like this dire, hopeless kind of a take on things. And then the middle part is this, Back to the Future 2 style time travel adventure. And then the last part is like this just huge destruction-filled action sequence, which is a lot of fun. To me, like, I feel like this is a conclusion. Like, it does feel like a bookend to the films that we've seen before it. But the thing that I really enjoy about this movie is it also feels like a tribute to all those films. Like, we get to go back to some of those moments, and it really has great moments for all of the characters, or at least the prime characters here. HT, you are the only one who has not gotten a chance to talk about this movie, either on the podcast or on the site, so feel free to go long. What did you think?
Well, Brad, first of all, stole my line. So
what was your line?
I was going to go with, this is a miracle of a movie, but okay. I am in awe of this movie. I was also one of the people who didn't really enjoy Infinity War because it didn't feel like a movie to me. But this feels both like a movie and like you were saying, Peter, just a tribute to all of the 11 years of storytelling that we've seen. It's amazing to me that it is able to act on like both of those levels. We see it working so well as this small, more intimate character film, and yet is able to tie in and wrap up all these arcs that have been going on for a decade now. And that to me was just so amazing to see. And I really liked the first half of the film, actually. I didn't expect it to take quite its time, and I love when movies get ponderous and almost meditative like that. I really like that exploration of grief and trauma, and the idea that these heroes have failed Earth and have failed humanity. And that's something for me was so interesting to see the Avengers and all of the heroes in this movie grapple with. It's a very mature sort of subject that you don't really often see in these kind of films, and it feels just so grand and epic at the same time as being so small, and I like that a lot. I liked all three aspects of this film. The time heist, as they say, which everyone is excited about the word time heist, but I will say Doctor Who used that term first. I'm gonna pull that in.
Do you think one of the writers is a fan of Doctor Who, or do you think they just didn't know?
I wouldn't be surprised. The Russo brothers did write for Community, after all, and Community did have a wonderful parody of Doctor Who that was a running gag throughout the series. So I wouldn't be surprised if they, maybe made a nod to that in some way. But yeah, I liked even the action in the third act of this film. I really enjoyed, because I've always felt like Marvel action tends to be kind of to veer more towards visual noise, and I think while this one did threaten to be somewhat visual noise in that case, it had a much more strong emotional through line, and that for me was able to just like anchor the big battle scene even more, and it had so many great moments that for me rang much more much stronger than it did in Infinity War. And I like the concept of just like the hot potato of the that I won't spoil it, but that goes through the film.
Well, people are listening to this like they are. This is a spoiler discussion, so go ahead and
the hot potato of the I guess Infinity. Not gauntlet now. I think it's
the Iron Gauntlet. I think is what we're calling it. I don't know.
Yes, the Iron Gauntlet. I think that was a really nice thread that like helped tie all the battles together. Otherwise, it might have just descended into like a little bit too much chaos. But I really enjoyed that. I had, some issues with a few of the character arcs and some of the moments that did feel a little too much like pandering to me. But overall, it was just such a phenomenal film and experience, and I appreciate it on like so many levels.
Yeah, actually talk about that. I want to hear about those moments. I know we're going along with this, but like, what were the moments that you did not like?
Well, for me, I really liked Thor's arc, but I didn't enjoy the clashing tones that took place through that arc. I like that we see him kind of come to terms with like he is not meant to be a king, but the fact that they lean into the comedy for so long of it kind of just rubbed me the wrong way, because I felt like his arc was really interesting and was one of the most cohesive parts of this film, but then they kind of played it as a joke for the majority of his screen time, and that bothered me a little bit. And I'm
wondering how do you feel about him handing over the kingdom to Valkyrie, which I know she obviously has stepped up and she became a leader in her own right in New Asgard, but to me it felt like she was like, Thor was like, here, I don't want to do this anymore. Here, have my leftovers.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was referring to in terms of just like how the journey to get to that ending felt a little bit incoherent, just because it's like you can see where the beats land, but the way that they build to those beats don't exactly work. Like I can see him, realizing that he's not meant to be a king and that he thinks that she is a much better leader, and we kind of see some of that, but the way that they play it off as a joke makes it feel a little bit just insincere in a way. This is, I have a probably controversial opinion about Black Widow's arc, because I was not totally satisfied with it. I just felt like her ending was kind of a disservice to her, but it's more because of her inconsistent characterization throughout the entire Marvel franchise, less than it is about like what she actually goes through in this film. Because to me, just have her leap into, grieving so hard and so much for like their failure, and then leaping into like her having to sacrifice herself. I didn't really see where just like how that all ties together, and it felt like to me like she should have had more time to like work to have that depicted on screen. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It
almost seems to me like it's like Scarlett Johansson being like, I don't want to do any more movies, and they found a way to write her off. But then she has this whole other movie that's coming. which
Yeah.
is so that's kind of confusing. Brad, I know you wrote up a thing for the site basically speculating on what this movie means for the Black Widow movie. What does it mean?
Yes. Well, as we know, like we talked about, Black Widow dies, so this movie can't really be one that continues with her in the events that follow Avengers Endgame. So more likely, as the rumors have said, this movie will be a prequel that focuses on Black Widow during her early days as an assassin for the KGB, presumably before she even became a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. This could maybe even lead into how she becomes recruited by S.H.I.E.L.D. A lot of people have hoped that maybe this movie would focus potentially around the time that is referenced a few times throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe when her and Hawkeye had some kind of mission that they pulled off in Budapest.
They even mention it in this movie. Like, they're like, doesn't Hawkeye say, like, we're a long way from Budapest as they're, like, light speeding through the galaxy?
Yeah, exactly. So that's obviously a key point for them. That's something they could end up saving. But like I said, more likely this is a prequel that will focus on a younger Black Widow, and will give us a little bit more history of her character.
So why are people going to care about this movie if Scarlett Johansson's character is dead?
I mean, part of me is wondering if maybe it will add a little bit more meat to her background, give her some more significance, and perhaps in the way that Avengers Endgame does, maybe use the past as a way to enhance what we already know about Black Widow and what happens in the future. Also similarly to how Captain Marvel does something by making the events of the 90s a little bit more significant to what happens in the future as well. So perhaps there's a chance here that this will help flesh her out as a character, may also set up something that is coming in the Marvel Cinematic Universe later that will follow the events of Avengers Endgame, making it more important into the overall timeline. But we're kind of still in the dark right now because we don't even know specifically what characters cast members like Florence Pugh and David Harbour and Rachel Weisz are playing. So Marvel's still keeping stuff under wraps until after Spider-Man Far From Home comes out. So right now all we can do is speculate.
So you're basically proposing that this is going to be like that Jason Bourne movie, that like spin-off movie, but it's going to have the main character in it.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be good.
Unlike that movie. Okay, H.E., I know we cut you off because that was a perfect transition into that, but you had one other third problem with the movie.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, going off of Black Widow and kind of the disservice that she's been done by just the Marvel franchise in general, I feel like the big girl power moment in the third act of the big battle of Avengers Endgame rang a little hollow for me. It felt very unearned because it happens when Peter Parker is holding on to the Iron Gauntlet, and he gives it to Captain Marvel, who says, how are you going to get it through all of that? And then it just kind of leads into this big moment where all the female superheroes suddenly appear and are like, we'll take care of it. And it did get a big applause from my audience, and I can see why it would be such a really powerful moment for like young girls and people who see that. But for me, it just felt like, I guess, too little, too late. I keep talking about the history of Marvel, but this is a film that relies so heavily on the history of Marvel. They haven't really done a good service by their female characters, and to just kind of bring them and rally them all together into one big feminism moment felt to me like very unearned and very just cheap. So
also the logistics of that moment don't make sense. Like, all these women are all over the place. Brad, were you saying that like Wasp is at the time is trying to start up the van?
That was me, actually.
Or that was you?
Yeah, I was like, wasn't she like in the middle of trying to start up the van? And it was a very important task that she and Scott were trying to do so that they can get the gauntlet over there. But they just wanted that powerful moment, that marquee moment, and I understand why they included it. And it kind of felt to me like they were hinting to, like, oh look, this is going to be our A-Force team. Well, look out for that movie in 3 to 4 years. So it just felt too much like pandering to me.
Yeah, to me, it did work, although I do see all the problems with it. I don't know. I'm not sure why it worked for me, because like it is pandering. It doesn't seem like pandering. It is pandering. But it doesn't make any sense in the bigger scale of this battle. But for some reason it filled my heart with joy. Maybe it was just seeing those characters together for the first time.
I disagree. I disagree that it doesn't make sense in the scale of the battle, because I think at that point the van has already been restarted, and so she comes over right afterwards to join them, because at that moment Captain Marvel is trying to fly the gauntlet into the van to send it to go back in time and put the stones back. So that's I think that logistically makes sense. And plus, I mean, they're all. If you want to talk about a larger thing that doesn't entirely make sense, and you wonder how it all works, is I'm wondering how they coordinated the fact that everybody.
That's what I'm saying.
Somehow had no. Well, hold on. But I'm not even just all the women coming together. I'm talking about just how everyone communicates to each other, because all of the Avengers apparently have earpieces that are all connected to each other, including the ones who just came out of. From being unsnapped from all these different parts of the world of the universe, but they're somehow all prepared with an earpiece that allows them all to talk to each other at any given time.
Not only that, but Doctor Strange opens up the portals. If you actually see this movie a second time, you can see there's a portal to Wakanda, there's a portal to Titan. So how does he communicate with all those people and being like, we're going to go in and we're going to go to this battle? Like
magic.
Magic.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah, literally magic. But the other thing that occurs to me in this woman moment is that I don't think Captain Marvel needs any help. I mean, she seems like so overpowered, and
that's the big thing, especially because she immediately flies through everything that's in their way, except for Thanos.
Chris, what did you think of this moment?
What, the girl power moment, or
yeah?
Yeah, my biggest problem with this movie. It's not even that big of a problem, but there is a lot of fan service in the film, and I say this in my review actually, that even though there's a lot of fan service, the movie sort of earns it just because of the achievement of 20 plus films, 10 plus years. At the same time, of all the fan service movies of all the fan service moments in the movie, that the girl power moment is, I think, the most egregious, because for one thing, half those characters don't even know each other, but they're all like, "Yeah, ladies, let's get in formation." It's like, come on, let's calm down. And it also kind of
calm down.
It kind of bugged me that Black Widow was dead at that point, because she's the longest running female MCU character, and she didn't get to be in that moment because she had to jump off the stupid cliff. So that sort of felt like a ripoff too. Like, she didn't get to be part of that big girl power moment, and it just, of all the fan service moments, that's the one that so painfully feels like a scene where the filmmakers are clapping themselves on the back and being like, let's put this directly in the movie so everyone will cheer at it. And at the same time, it's fine. I get why they did it. If people like it, I'm not gonna fault them for liking it, but it definitely made me cringe ever so slightly.
For what it's worth, the writers, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, did address the fact that when they were talking about this scene, they were aware that it did feel like pandering and it could be perceived as such, but they thought that just the visual of it and just that moment was too good to pass it up for that reason alone.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, you're never going to get that many female superheroes in one place at one time ever again, probably. Or maybe, 10 years down the line, I guess. But, I mean, hopefully they do, in a female Avengers team up, and what Kevin Feige was talking about to Tessa Thompson wasn't just this moment. Hopefully it's bigger than that. But this movie did some huge box office over the weekend. Actually, it broke almost every single record. Brad, tell us about it.
Yes, the box office predictions that came out beforehand knew this movie was going to be huge, but there was some skepticism as to whether or not it would reach some of these huge milestones that had never even been touched by previous movies. But Avengers Endgame exceeded even the highest expectations. It had a worldwide debut of $1.2 billion. It's the first time any movie ever has made $1 billion in its opening weekend around the world. And then on top of that, in the United States, it had a $350 million opening, which is by far the biggest opening weekend for any movie. It was nearly $100 million more than the previous record that was set by Avengers Infinity War's $257.6 million opening weekend. It broke the single day records. It broke the individual weekend day records. It had the biggest opening in China. And a big reason that the worldwide opening was so huge this time compared to Infinity War is because Infinity War didn't open day and date in China like Avengers Endgame did. And the China box office added a huge chunk of worldwide money to it, around $330 million. This is just an unprecedented box office event, and I'm wondering if there's any movie that can even come close to topping this, because you could say Rise of Skywalker, because the Star Wars movies are always huge box office contenders, but I feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has much broader appeal than the Star Wars movies. Star Wars is very popular, but it still very much has a niche audience when it comes to general audiences. And I just don't know if that movie has the power to do it. But
they're also going to sell that movie as like the end of the series too.
That's what I was going to say. That could help it. And then of course there's the question of whether or not people care enough about the Avatar sequels to make those a big deal, because Avatar is still the all-time highest-grossing movie with around $2.7 billion. So I think those are the only two movies that could possibly outdo Avengers Endgame at this point. But even then, that's a big if.
By the way, for the summer movie wager, we all put in a side bet, guessing what the box office for Avengers Endgame will end up being for the summer. Obviously, we cannot foresee that right now, but if Avengers Endgame followed the same multiple of the opening weekend to the end of the summer numbers, it would end up making $892 million by the end of the summer domestically. And out of all the side bets from the Slash Filmcast to Slash Film Daily, I put the highest number in there, and I put 850, and that's even less than what it's going to do. So I think we all underestimated this, which is kind of insane.
You just wanted to toot your own horn, Peter. You're like, I win.
But I thought I was going over. Because this is also Price is Right rule. So if I had gone over, I took a big swing, and I think I'm there. I don't know. I also think this is going to have this movie over Infinity War is going to have more repeat viewing. I feel like there's more to go back and see, multiple times.
I do wonder. I think the second weekend will be a good indicator, simply because there's a chance that this movie could be front loaded because people want to avoid spoilers and they're seeing it as soon as possible. But the 3-hour runtime may start to hurt repeat viewings because it is so long and not as easy to rewatch as some of the other blockbuster hits.
Okay, let's dive into the movie itself. The movie starts off with this hopeless scene in space, and after or actually it doesn't start off with the hopeless scene in space. It starts off with Hawkeye, and I'm just wondering, how many of you guys, how many seconds into that scene did it take you guys to realize what was going on here?
Well, I mean, I predicted this based on the footage that came from the trailers, so I knew exactly what was going to happen, but it still made it really fun, that the people were still so taken aback when all of a sudden his family disappears.
Yeah, the reaction in the theater was just insane. And it was funny because there was a lot of reaction when it actually happened, but there was reaction throughout the scene of people just realizing where the scene was headed.
Yeah.
But, okay, so the movie begins with this, the Marvel Studios logo and to Dear Mr. Fantasy. Something I didn't notice. I've seen this movie 3 times in the theater, and I did not notice this. But that Marvel Studios logo is actually different than the traditional Marvel Studios logo. I think this is something that even my biggest Marvel fan friend did not notice. HT, what is different about this intro?
You may notice if you go back and see Avengers Endgame and watch the logo very closely that it is missing all of the Marvel characters who have been dusted since Avengers Infinity War. So this is the version of the Marvel Studios logo that shows all the MCU characters in the opening rather than just the flipping of the comic book pages. So you see Iron Man and Captain America throwing a shield, Black Widow, Black Panther. But if you watch the Endgame version, Black Panther's not there, Scarlet Witch isn't there, and it's only the core Avengers who are the main cast of Endgame.
So that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that the dusted are not there. Let's talk about some Easter eggs in this film. I know one thing I noticed is Black Widow at one point is eating a sandwich, and she threatens to throw the sandwich at someone, immediately in my mind, that made me think of the Ben Fritz book. What is it called, Chris?
The Big Picture.
Big Picture. And I know you wrote this up for the site, and kind of a facetious headline, the shocking truth behind the Avengers Endgame sandwich scene. But I think this is actually probably true, and I think it's a reference to something that happened in Marvel history. So tell us about it.
Yes, this is the story that for some reason made people angry because I just have that effect on people. I just infuriate everyone with everything I do.
I think it's the headline, by the way. I think people took it as like a real headline.
I don't know. I feel like how can you look at the headline and not see it's a joke? But what do I know? Anyway, so Ben Fritz, he has this great book. It's called The Big Picture. And the book is all about how Hollywood got to the point where it is right now, where what they primarily care about are superhero movies and big tentpole franchises and all that stuff. And the book delves into a lot of stuff about Marvel and a lot of stuff about Sony, because the infamous Sony hacks serve as a really big source for a lot of Ben Fritz's material here. And he writes this story about how after The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out and wasn't as big a hit as Sony was hoping to be, Kevin Feige at Marvel Studios finally thought it was time to make the move, and he sat down with Amy Pascal of Sony and at a lunch meeting, and he pitched her on the idea of finally bringing Spider-Man into the MCU, because if you weren't aware, up until Spider-Man Homecoming, or actually I guess it was Civil War, Marvel didn't have the rights to Spider-Man. Marvel Studios didn't have the rights to Spider-Man. That was all Sony. And so Kevin Feige, he sat down Amy Pascal over lunch, and he said, look, I love Spider-Man. Why don't you let us produce the next Spider-Man movie? And Amy Pascal was so angry at this offer that she literally threw her sandwich at Kevin Feige. And, she tried to play it off as a joke, but, her pride was wounded, basically, because she felt like giving in and finally giving Spider-Man, which was Sony's biggest property, to Marvel would be admitting defeat. Of course, we all know how this turned out. Eventually, they did relent, but at the same time, Sony made Into the Spider-Verse, which is a great movie in its own right. So they're finally getting the hang of things. But with all this in mind, with the idea of Amy Pascal throwing her sandwich at Kevin Feige, there's a scene in the beginning of Endgame where after the intro where they kill Thanos, it jumps forward 5 years into the future. The world is trying to move on from the snap, but Black Widow is understandably still miserable about everything, and she's one of the few people holding down the fort at Avengers HQ. She's sitting around in her sweatpants, her roots are growing out, and she's making a very depressing sandwich, which is a peanut butter sandwich on white bread, the most depressing sandwich anyone could possibly make. And so she's eating the sandwich, and Captain America comes in, and ever the optimist, he's like, when I was driving over here, I saw some whales in the Hudson River, and the air is cleaner, and he's trying to make the best of a terrible situation. And
by the way, I love that this movie, even for a second, explores the positive effects of the dusting. Do you know what I mean?
I like that too, and I wish there was actually more of that in the movie, where people were trying to be like, maybe it's not such a bad thing, but they move on from that very quickly. But I did like that moment. But in any case, Black Widow does not want to hear it, and she says, basically, if you're trying to get me to look on the bright side, I'm going to throw my sandwich at you, and then the scene moves on. And it's a quick, somewhat amusing scene, but it does actually get somewhat more amusing if you try and take it in context with the Amy Pascal Kevin Feige story.
Yeah. I don't know. My theory is that's referenced by the writers, Marcus and McFeely, but who knows? Maybe one day we'll get a chance to ask them. And if I ever do get to sit down with them, I want to talk to them about the time travel of this movie, because I'm a time travel nerd. I wrote this whole piece up for the site. I'll put it in the link in the show notes. It's called "Let's Talk About the Nerdy Logistical Paradoxes of Avengers Endgame," and I think I've nailed down how time travel works in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So bear with me for a second. I think Smart Hulk explains that when you go into the past, you can't affect the future because the past is now your future. So what that means, in my mind, is that if people in this movie go to the past, they're actually not going to the past of their prime timeline. They're actually going to an alternate version of the past. So when they go to the alternate version of the past, an alternate version of Thanos from 2014 goes into the future and they kill him, that doesn't stop Thanos from originally getting the Infinity Gauntlet, and it doesn't cause this entire huge paradox. It also means that, when Nebula kills 2014 Nebula, that she doesn't cease to exist. So there's that version of how time travel works explains a lot of what I think people are having problems with this movie. But the one thing it doesn't quite explain is at the end of this movie, old Cap appears on the bench outside of, overlooking the lake. And a lot of people, so he went back in time, he returned the stones, which is also interesting in its own right because, he has to come face to face with Red Skull, his arch nemesis. He has to go and return. And I'm wondering, by the way, if you return this, like Red Skull said, a soul for a soul. So if you return the Soul Stone, do you get anything in return? I don't know. I guess we'll never know. But so he goes back in time and he goes and spends some time with Peggy. This is the moment that I think we theorized in a past edition of the podcast. And HT, you said you'd cry if that happened. Did you cry?
Did I cry? I maybe teared up.
Maybe. I can tell you I cried. So, but okay, so he ends up spending the rest of his life with Peggy, as far as we know. He is now an old man, and a lot of people think that this breaks the timeline because how can he exist in this universe as an old man if when you go back in time you can't change anything? My only theory to basically explain that is that from the past, the alternate past that you go into, if you ever travel back in time to the future, you're traveling to the main canon timeline. So I'm assuming Cap at some point, maybe during the big battle of what Ben likes to call the Battle of Upstate New York, he travels to the Battle of Upstate New York, watches that from afar, and then sits it out, for a day or two while the funeral happens, and then goes and meets with them. So that's what I'm assuming. But is there any logistics to this time travel? Or do you think that the writers didn't even care?
I mean, time travel's tricky. So I don't think it's a matter of not caring. I think it's just a matter of there's always going to be some kind of paradox that you can pull out of it that you kind of just have to accept and understand that it's not easy to make perfect.
Yeah, it certainly plays fast and loose with the rules of time travel, but it kind of hand waves it away with the concept of alternate timelines, which both make it easy to just kind of explain, oh, this changed, so it's just an alternate timeline now, and also give a lot of potential storytelling opportunities for Marvel.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Also, the other thing I wondered about in this piece, and I wanted to hear what you guys are thinking, how does the unsnapping work? When it's actually snapped and the people all come back, the half of this world, not just people, but creatures, every living thing, returns. Do they return to the place where they left? It seems like in that final battle, we see, Spider-Man and all the people that were snapped returning from Titan. So you would think that they would appear exactly where they left, but that leaves for some interesting questions. If you were snapped while you were riding an airplane, do you just reappear in the middle of the sky and then just fall to your death? No? Anybody?
Oh my.
Yeah, this is my one of the best things I think that has been brought up about this, because there are so many ways that being brought back from the snap can go wrong, and it does make me wonder about the logistics of it.
Yeah, I mentioned in this piece, which I would highly recommend because I'm breezing over this time travel stuff, but I really get into the nitty gritty nerdiness of it. But I bring in this piece. What if someone was having sex with their significant other when the snap happened, right? So if they get dusted, which is, by the way, terrifying in its own right, for that person that's in the bed. Now, this person has spent 5 years. They finally gotten over, they're like one of these people like Joe Russo in that group session. They're now dating, and they're now like on their first, their third date with someone, and they're having sex in that bed, and all of a sudden, unsnapping happens.
I like that this scenario requires that they're having sex at the exact time that the unsnapping happens. So it's like, make it extra awkward.
Yeah, I don't know. I bring up a couple of these scenarios in that piece, but I know we're never going to get the answers to those questions, but I think they're fun regardless. Let's talk about more Easter eggs. Stan Lee has a cameo in this movie. Ichi, you wrote an article about this?
Yes. So this is actually Stan Lee's final on-screen cameo in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He shot several cameos before his death in 2018, and this will be the last of them, kind of capping off both of this era in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and also just Stan Lee's long legacy making cameos on screen. So his cameo actually takes place during a sequence at the 1970s S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters when Tony Stark and Steve Rogers are in the midst of their time heist, and they arrive in order to get a chance at grabbing the Tesseract a second time. But as they're in the midst of this heist, Stan Lee zooms by in a white muscle car, beautiful lady by his side, goofy bumper sticker on the back of his car that says "Nuff said," which, fun fact, was one of Lee's catchphrases from his messages to readers of Marvel Comics. And he says as he's passing by, "Make love, not war." It's very 70s hippie style, and he's sporting a look that is very suiting of that. He is de-aged in this scene, so he is still kind of gray, but not completely white. He has long flowing hair and a generous mustache.
Yeah. Brad, where would you rank this in the Stan Lee cameo canon?
I mean, I like this one mostly just because it gives us young Stan Lee again, and that's kind of a cool thing to see since all the other cameos have been Stan Lee in his older years. So that's fun, and I think just giving him that that hippie spirit, and in a funny way, almost like shaking his fist at the people who created Captain America, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I think I like his Captain Marvel cameo more, or even I don't know. This is probably on the lower end for me. I like his appearance in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like, I feel like that's a perfect end for him.
Yeah, I think for me, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was the best sort of goodbye one for him.
A lot of people are asking after seeing this movie, who is that young man at the funeral at the end, at Tony Stark's funeral? Brad, who is he?
Yeah, so there's a shot during Tony Stark's funeral that pans through pretty much all of the superhero characters from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You recognize everybody that's there. They're all standing in their own groups that they know each other with. The Guardians of the Galaxy are standing next to each other, and Ant-Man and the Wasp are standing there with Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne, or Janet Van Dyne. And so as you move towards the back, there's one teenage kid just standing there by himself, and it's kind of hard to recognize who he is. And it's mostly because the actor has aged so much since his appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's Ty Simpkins, who played the young, sarcastic whiz kid that Tony Stark meets in Iron Man 3. He's grown up a little bit since then, so he's a little bit taller, a little bit lankier. His face is grown out, and so he's matured, and he just doesn't look like his young self anymore. But that's him standing there. It's kind of a cool moment that he's there for Tony Stark's funeral, since him and Tony bonded a little bit, almost having him as like just a quick makeshift stepdad, if you will, even though Tony kind of resisted being that for the kid. But I thought it was a nice touch to have him there.
Yeah, it was great seeing all these people in one scene. This scene was shot the same weekend that they shot that Vanity Fair photo shoot with all the people for the 10 years of Marvel. And the only thing that I don't like about the scene is, well, there's a couple things. Oh, no, mostly one. I think I brought this up in the last Avengers podcast that we did on Slash Film Daily, is that we don't get to see Captain Marvel reunite with Nick Fury, decades later. they're just kind of standing near each other. So we don't get to see that moment. But also interesting here is Samuel Jackson's Nick Fury is seen in the background there on the porch. And Spider-Man is also at this funeral. But from what we've seen with the Spider-Man Far From Home trailers, they meet for the first time in that movie. So, Brad, I'm wondering, like, do you think that's a prequel moment, or do you think they just never met at the funeral?
Well, there's Endgame has kind of thrown a wrench in what I was thinking about where Spider-Man Far From Home will fall, because we see in Endgame that Peter returns to high school, which could perfectly set up what happens in Far From Home. But at the same time, the amount of time that has passed since Civil War, which happened before Spider-Man Homecoming, and the events of Endgame, the timeline doesn't entirely match up, because Peter Parker was a sophomore in Spider-Man Homecoming, which happens after Civil War, and Scott Lang is under house arrest for a couple of years, as we learn in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So that would mean another year would have had to have passed afterwards, which would the time the way, if you look at it, it just doesn't really make sense. You'd have to wonder what Peter Parker has been doing for an extended period of time if this movie takes place after Endgame.
It's supposed to take place in his next year of high school, right?
Right, but that would mean that we probably would have to skip a year of his high school somehow because of what happens in Ant-Man and the Wasp. At least that's from what I can tell with how certain other events play out between when Spider-Man and meets Tony Stark in Civil War, and then through the events of Endgame. But I don't. What the issue here though is that makes it kind of complicated is that when Peter Parker returns to school, 5 years have passed. Presumably, all the students that are coming back are those that have been dusted.
Yeah.
Because the rest of them would presumably have continued school for those years as life continued. So it's tough to say. Part of me wonders if maybe Spider-Man Far From Home will take place before the events of Avengers Endgame, simply because this is the last movie in Phase 3, and much in the way that Ant-Man ended Phase 2, this will take place before that finale.
I mean, that would be smart, but I wonder why all this time, all the reporters asking Kevin Feige about that, why wouldn't he just say, "Oh, it's a prequel"?
I think also the Spider-Man movies have always been very loose with canon. I remember there was that thing in Spider-Man Homecoming where they have the 8 years later transition from the Battle of New York, and then that's when Spider-Man teams up in Civil War, and that doesn't make sense. And they basically, I think Russo brothers were basically confirmed that was wrong, and I think the Spider-Man people don't really care as much about the canon as the Marvel people do.
Yeah. Talking about that funeral, one person we did not see at that funeral is Gamora, the Gamora that traveled from 2014 to now and was in that big battle, but then she kind of disappeared. Chris, I know you wrote up this whole story theorizing what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 could be. Or is it going to be called Volume 3, or is it going to be as Guardians of the Galaxy?
I doubt they're going to change the title, but who knows? But yeah, I have some theories. Other people have these theories as well. It's not like I invented them, but I'm hoping, the hints that are dropped at the end of Endgame are giving us an idea of what's to come. I mean, first and foremost, I really hope Thor sticks with them for the whole movie. It's set up that, Thor goes on board the ship with them at the end, and there's that whole back and forth where him and Star-Lord are both, jockeying for leadership. And I really hope that's part of the third film, because if not, it's a huge wasted opportunity, because Chris Hemsworth has great comedic timing. He fits in so well with those characters, and I really, honestly, I find him at this point more interesting than Star-Lord. I don't care if Star-Lord comes back or not. I might be more interested with Thor taking over as the lead of that franchise, but I doubt that'll happen.
But it seems like he doesn't want to be the leader, or does
yeah. He definitely wants to be somewhat in charge. I don't know. But then the other thing is, the Russos did this very clever, cheeky thing where they get to have their cake and eat it too, where they still get to have Gamora be dead, but also she's alive because the present day Gamora is still dead, but the Gamora from a few years ago gets to live in the present day now because she traveled through time. And even though she helps everyone out at the end, she also doesn't stick around. We're not really shown where she goes, and I actually think this is sort of like bad editing, bad filmmaking on the part of the Russos that they don't really show us where she went, because as a result, some people.
I think it's intentional. I think they want you to think, was she dusted when Tony Stark snapped his fingers? Was she part of Thanos' group that was dusted? Because how does he know to differentiate her from the rest of that group?
I don't know, but I think that's bad filmmaking, and the Russos really goofed there because it's silly, because we all know she's not dusted. She's going to be in this next movie. It's part of the contracts, and it's a goof on their part. They really should have just not bothered doing that. But in any case, she's not around, and I'm guessing a big part of the third movie is going to be about the Guardians trying to find her, because there's that shot where Star-Lord is looking at the computer screen, and it says searching, and it has Gamora's photo on it. So I'm sure that's going to be part of the film where they're trying to find her and where she went. And obviously the whole relationship that built up between Gamora and Star-Lord is gone at this point, because that Gamora doesn't exist anymore. So it's going to be the plot.
That's my big question. Like, if they find her, like, it seems like it would just be repeating the same storyline over again if it's Star-Lord trying to, them falling in love. It's the same dynamic that they started with. Do you know what I mean?
Well, who's to say they're going to fall in love again? I mean, this is actually a clever way for them to have a completely new take on this character. Like, there's no saying she's going to end up being the same Gamora we've grown to know. Like, her experiences aren't going to be the same, so her character is going to be different, unless they get lazy and then just make her be the same exact character.
I don't think they are going to, because I think that would just be too much of a retread. Maybe this time she'll fall in love with the tree, as they say in this.
Yeah. I would be happy if she didn't fall in love with Star-Lord, because I never bought their chemistry. But yeah.
I know in your piece, Chris, you were pitching the idea of a Rocket Nebula relationship.
Yes, I want this to happen. I'm not big into shipping because I'm a grown man, but
hey, grown men can be into shipping too.
All right.
Clarify there.
But as far as shipping goes, this is the brunt of my shipping experience, where I want Rocket and Nebula to hook up. I want this to happen. There's a shot. One of my favorite moments in Endgame is where they just have this silent moment where Rocket comforts her, and I just really like Nebula as a character, and it's come a long way, because I actually didn't care for her at all in the first Guardians movie, and then I think Guardians 2 really used Karen Gillan's potential to its fullest, and she's a really good actress, and she's made this part her own. And I just really want more of her in the franchise, and I want her and Rocket, who are both the most miserable members of the group, to just fall for each other. They're both miserable; they deserve each other.
And they've both been like scientifically engineered and changed, altered in ways.
Right? They're both like self-hating freaks, and that's what they have in common. And I think those two kids could be happy together.
Yeah. HT, I know you, there was an unexpected crossover that happened in this movie that you were kind of excited about.
Yeah, I'm one of the few people who keep up with the Marvel TV series, one of which is Agent Carter. And we saw the first crossover between the Marvel Cinematic Universe and a Marvel TV show with the appearance of this character played by James Darcy. James Darcy plays Edwin Jarvis, who first appeared in Agent Carter, the ABC series that starred Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter in the aftermath of World War II, as she is working for the SSR, which is the predecessor to S.H.I.E.L.D. So Edwin Jarvis is Howard Stark's butler, who is actually the inspiration for Tony Stark's AI, Jarvis. And he and Agent Carter team up in the series to clear Howard Stark's name and go on other adventures that I don't quite remember, but it's always fun. And James D'Arcy is just so delightful in this role. And he makes an appearance during the 70s SHIELD sequence in which Howard Stark, now played by John Slattery because he's older, gets into his car, which the door is being held open by Jarvis. And he asks Jarvis, "Do I know that man?" referring to Tony Stark. And Jarvis says, "You meet a lot of people," and that's the extent of his appearance.
It's the most Back to the Future scene of this whole movie, I think. Like that meeting between Tony and his father Howard. I wonder if Disney Plus is gonna, like, Agent Carter was probably in my mind the only good Marvel. I guess Daredevil had some moments, but
Jessica Jones.
Jessica
Peter.
Jones, yeah, I watched the first season. That was fine. But okay, Agent Carter, I think, was the only great one in my mind, and I wonder if Disney Plus, if people are gonna find that series on Disney Plus, and if there's a chance. I know so many fans have been demanding for another season of that, but maybe something like Disney Plus could make that possible. Who knows? Okay, the end credits of this movie did not have it's the first Marvel film to not have an end credit scene at all. Instead, it has some sounds, which honestly, the first time I heard the sounds, I was confused. I thought maybe this is like them ringing a bell for Tony, like a 10-ring salute kind of thing of him dying. But that is not what it is. Chris, can you talk? You wrote a whole piece on this on the site on how this end credit sound symbolizes both an ending and a beginning. What do you mean by that?
Yes, so you're not alone in being confused in the sound, because when I saw Endgame, first of all, I never stay for the end credits, but I did this time because I was reviewing the film, and I wanted to see if there was a scene, which there wasn't. But
wait a second here, Chris.
Yes.
You never stay for the end credits scene.
No, I don't care. It's a waste of time. I got places to be, Peter. I got things to do. Time is money. I can't sit around and wait for a cute little scene where Ant-Man high fives Dracula. I don't care. Like I don't need to see that scene. I got places to be.
I'm always wondering. I'm in these press screenings for Marvel movies, and like more than half the audience leaves. Like when the credits hit, and I'm like, who are these people? And I didn't have any idea I worked with one of these people.
Let's be honest here, Chris. If there was a scene where Ant-Man high-five Dracula, you bet your ass you'd stick around for that.
I mean, yeah, I guess if that were the case. Look, these movies are long. Like I want to get out of the theater, but look, like I said,
you are like, you respect cinema. Like, why not pay the respect to all these people that helped create these things by watching their names go over the screen?
Let's not get crazy and call these movies cinema. All right, let's.
Okay.
We're about to get some angry emails now.
Anyway,
I have a feeling many people are going to be mad at you, Chris.
Well, I'm used to it at this point. But anyway, so yeah, there's this sound over the Marvel logo that comes up, and it's a clanging sound, and I distinctly heard someone in my screening be like, "Oh, that must be Thor's hammer." But no, it's not that. It is a hammer, though. It is the sound effect from Iron Man building the first of many, 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 many Iron Man suits in the first Iron Man. There, the first Iron Man movie, he ends up captured. He's in a cave. He builds the suit. And that's what that hammering is. It's him pounding away at the metal. And this is a cute little, clever little thing, because for one thing, it's Marvel acknowledging the start of everything, because that moment where Tony is building his suit is literally like the beginning of the MCU, and it was back before any of us really had any idea of what the MCU would actually become. And at the same time, so the way I see it is that moment is, for one, it's paying tribute to Tony / Iron Man, who is dead, and it's a little tribute to him, and it's a way of closing the book by saying, here's where it all started, here's where it's ending. At the same time, it's also symbolizing new beginning, because that whole scene is about Tony essentially being reborn. He goes into that cave one person, he's this smug weapons manufacturer, and then he comes out completely different. I mean, he's still smug, but he's a new man. He's a hero at this point. And if anything,
and by the end of the series, he ended up sacrificing himself, something that you would never assume he would ever do in the beginning of the story.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was about. Yeah. So, if anything, the Infinity Saga is his journey from becoming, from starting out as this one person and literally sacrificing himself to save the galaxy, and that's a huge arc for a character. So the way I see it is, it's both, Marvel saying goodbye and Marvel also saying, yes, this door is closed. This chapter of our cinematic universe has ended. But now something else is going to begin. Something else is going to emerge from that cave, so to speak, that metaphorical cave, and be something new and exciting, and who knows what it's going to be. And that's how I interpret that sound.
I think that's a good interpretation. One other Easter egg I wanted to bring up that we did not have on our notes. Brad, I've seen this movie 3 times. I have not seen this, Brad, but Brad tells me that there is a secret cameo that you can see in the big end battle.
Yes, that's true. So a friend of mine alerted this to me. This popped up on Reddit, and I wanted to make sure that it was true. So I looked for it when I saw it the 3rd time. And in the shot during the final battle at the destroyed Avengers facility, when the Wasp first arrives on the scene, and they're running through all the shots of people showing up to fight, right when the Wasp arrives, if you look in the background, there's a group of Ravagers that are behind her, ready to fight with all the Avengers. And in the just to the right of her, right around her abdomen level, between a couple Ravagers who are walking, you can very quickly see a shot of Howard the Duck holding a gun, ready to fight, which is pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, no, that is cool. I'm gonna probably have to see this a 4th time just to see that on the big screen. HT, I know you have to run out because you are covering the Tribeca Film Festival for the site. So I'm gonna let you do that now because we just have a couple more things to get to. But I know I want to keep you around to sit through this. So where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me writing every day at /film.com, and I'm on Twitter at htranbui.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, we got a couple things left to talk about that I wanted to get to. There was this interview with the Avengers Endgame writers that was published by the New York Times, and there was a bunch of stuff that came out of that I thought was worth chatting about. Brad, you wrote this whole piece up, rounding up some of their quotes about death, the snap, and more. What do you think are the most interesting parts of that that people need to know?
Probably one of the more interesting things is them talking about exactly how they wanted to approach Thanos after he completes the snap. There was some discussion about how they should kill him, when they should kill him, what exactly it means for how the movie proceeds after that. And so McFeely says, we always had this problem. The guy has the ultimate weapon. He can see it coming. It's ridiculous. We were just banging our heads for weeks. And at some point, the executive producer, Tran, said, can't we just kill him? And we all went, well, what happens if you kill him? Why would you kill him? Why would he let you kill him? And then Marcus says, it reinforced Thanos' agenda. He was done. Not to make him too Christ-like, but it was like, if I've got to die, I can die now. So they really didn't know what to do with Thanos after he had completed his mission. And audiences would wonder, okay, well, where's Thanos now? What's going on? And so the idea of having the Avengers going to just kill him really actually hits home even harder the idea that they failed, because now that Thanos is dead, they have no way to get the stones back. And it makes that bumper that, very dramatically reveals that 5 years has passed even more impactful, because it shows you the Avengers really have failed. They haven't figured out a way to fix this. And even when they defeat Thanos, there's no victory there because they've still lost, and they have to live with that loss for what seems like the rest of their lives. They have no mission. They have no villain. They have nothing to fight for anymore. And that's their life from then on. So I think it was a really interesting idea to do that, because everyone knew that they were going to have to, fight Thanos again, and killing him immediately gives audiences this idea of well, what the hell happens now?
Yeah, no, yeah, my whole audience like gasped when it hit 5 years later. I'm actually kind of wondering, do you think there was ever a plan to maybe end Infinity War with Thanos getting killed? Do you know what I mean?
I actually think that they did talk about that before. We did something on that before?
Oh, maybe they did say that then. Maybe I'm repeating memory of me reading something about that. But I can totally see how those two movies could be cut at that point as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have a victory, but nothing has been changed. You still have whatever. But I actually love that they ended where they did. Chris, you also wrote up a story rounding up because the writers were asked about all these alternate versions of the movie, not just Endgame, but Infinity War. And you kind of have this whole roundup of that. What are some of the most interesting things?
Yeah, it's a pretty lengthy piece, so I urge everyone to read it to get the full details. But the writers they go into some interesting details about where they decided to place certain moments, what they originally had in earlier drafts. One such thing was they were wondering, when to bring certain characters back, because obviously, after Infinity War, half the universe gets snapped away, and one of the debates they had was how soon they would bring people back for Endgame, because obviously that was always the plan, to somehow undo what Thanos did and bring certain characters back, and they realized they couldn't do it so too early, and as a result, they also realized that a lot of characters that people liked, like Doctor Strange and Black Panther and so on, were just going to have to, sit out a long part of the movie. And, they literally said, they realized the movie can't be all things to all people. So they just had to go with it, even though they sort of struggled with trying to decide who does what and when. Some other things is earlier drafts, they had it so that instead of Black Widow sacrificing herself, they had Hawkeye sacrifice himself. There's that whole scene where they're trying to get the Soul Stone, and they're bickering about who will sacrifice himself. And ultimately, Black Widow is the one who dies, but they originally did have it in the draft so that Hawkeye died, but then they thought, by having Black Widow die, it sort of completes her character arc, which I personally don't really agree with, but that, I didn't write the movie.
I also don't agree with that. Like, I feel like I want to see more of Black Widow's story than I mean, I guess in this movie, it bookends it by us realizing, as the people watching this saga, that she has found a place for her. She finally found a family.
Right.
And I think that's the bookend.
Yeah, it's that she finally found a family and she's willing to sacrifice herself for them, but I don't know. Maybe it's just because I like Black Widow more than Hawkeye, so I'd rather spend more time with her. But some other things. What else? They said that when they started writing the time travel stuff, they were determined not to go back to the first Avengers film because they felt that would just be too fan servicey, which I think is interesting because this movie is filled with fan service. But that was like the one thing where they were trying to draw the line and be like, all right, whatever we do, we're not going to go back to the first Avengers film. And eventually the Russo brothers were just like, look, it'd be a lot easier for the story if we just went back to the first Avengers film. So they finally gave in and did that. During the same interview, they were asked, during that big end battle scene, did they ever consider having the Netflix Marvel characters show up? And they flat out said no, because they would have to explain who they were, and they've never actually been mentioned in the movies before, so they ultimately decided against that. They were also asked, would you have the X-Men show up? And they said, at the time they wrote the script, the Fox Disney deal wasn't done, so legally they couldn't do it. And even if they could have legally done it, they felt it would have been kind of rude to sort of reboot the X-Men because there's an X-Men movie coming out still, Dark Phoenix, and it would kind of be like a jerk move to have their own version of the X-Men show up before that movie even comes out.
Also, anybody asking, I know this is whoever did this interview wrote for the New York Times, but like, do people realize how movies are made. Like, this film was shot back to back with Infinity War. So if you could do the math and figure out how long ago that was shot, I mean, I guess you could you could do some reshoots at the last second. I mean, Marvel's not beyond that, right? Like, after the original Avengers film, after the premiere, I went to the premiere of the original Avengers film, that night after the junket, they filmed that shawarma scene and put it into the final release. So I guess, right. Yeah.
And at the same time, when you're doing interviews with people, you also have to write not just for yourself, you have to write for the general public. I know, obviously I'm no New York Times writer, so I don't want to compare myself to him. But, I know in the past I've done interviews where I've known the answer to certain questions, but I deliberately ask them because I know some of our readers might not know and they might be curious. So there's always a chance that question got brought up because of that.
Fair enough. So there's a lot more in that article. You can read that on slashfilm.com. Chris, is there any more that you want to say about Avengers Endgame? Because I know you've only touched the surface of what you wrote in your review.
No, I'm pleasantly surprised. I know all of our listeners have this idea that I hate the MCU. I don't hate the MCU. I just wish it was better than it. I think it is, because for better or worse, we're stuck with these movies. These movies take up a huge part of the cinematic landscape. And my theory is, if we're going to have these movies, multiple versions of these movies every year, I want them to be the best movies they possibly can be. And more often than not, I don't think they are. I think they're average or okay. I don't think any of them are outright terrible, except for maybe like Iron Man 2, but I think the majority of them are just okay. And I think Avengers Endgame actually transcends that. I think it is more than okay. It's actually really good. I don't know if I'd call it great, but I do think it finally gave me what I was hoping for with a lot of other Marvel movies. It goes big, it swings for the fences, it doesn't hold back. It leans into conclusions. One of my least favorite things about previous Marvel films is a lot of them feel like setup. Infinity War, I think, is the worst offender of this, where that movie feels almost entirely like setup for Endgame.
Oh, that is a question I want to ask you, Chris. Does seeing this movie, as this is a conclusion of this 2-story arc, does this in any way make that movie better?
Not for me. I still think that movie suffers from being. It feels almost rushed to me, which is ironic since this movie is longer. But this movie never actually feels rushed to me. Whereas Infinity War, it just feels like they're really rushing to get to this movie, and I understand why, because this is the better movie. But so that's my biggest takeaway here. I know not every Marvel movie can be as big in scope as this movie, but if future Marvel movies can lean into the emotional beats here and into the quieter moments, even I was really impressed there were a lot of quiet moments in this big 3-hour blockbuster, and I want more of that. I want more emotion. I want more spectacle. I want more scope. And if more Marvels followed this film, we'd be a lot better off. At the same time, I'm perfectly fine with the Russo brothers no longer directing Marvel movies, because I think they're average filmmakers at best, and I'm more excited to see what better directors do with this material.
Well, it seems like they're done with Marvel, so you can smile now. You can rest now, Chris.
Yes, finally.
Brad, do you have any final thoughts? Any observations you've made about the movie that you want to relay on this podcast?
I think that this is a very special movie. I think this is like without getting too hyperbolic, this will be one of those movies that we remember for a long time, and I think that this movie will be a lot of people's like when people talk about where they were when they first saw Star Wars, a lot of people are going to talk about seeing Avengers Endgame for the first time in theaters. It's literally an unprecedented moment, in motion pictures, because you've never seen a movie that ends, all these different story arcs from 21 movies that came before it, and does so in such a way that is satisfying to both critics and fans, and does so much with a relatively short period of time. I think one of the biggest complaints some people have had, and even Patrick H. Willems has talked about this in his video series breaking down some of the problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that you don't ever really feel the stakes of the Marvel Cinematic Universe sometime because you have such a finite window to spend with these characters as opposed to having long comic book arcs play out in multiple issues. And I think this movie, aided by its 3-hour runtime, does a great job with giving the Avengers some real stakes that they have to deal with, some real consequences that they have to accept for a time. It gives them some challenges to overcome, and really gives all of especially the main Avengers, a satisfying emotional character arc that helps them grow, not only in this movie by itself, but from the rest of the movies where they started in their own origin stories spread across the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's just, I really am in awe of what they pulled off with this movie. It is fantastic.
I think that's well said. So that brings us to the end here. Brad, where can people find more of your work online?
always/film.com. You can check me out on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and also my own podcast, Go Flix Yourself.
Chris, where can we find you?
Also /film.com, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413. Come tell me you hate all my theories.
Yes, we will come in mass to tell you that you need to sit in your seat until the end of the credits, Chris.
Okay.
Okay. I'll also link to your spoiler, or to Brad's spoiler review, your initial review, and also Ben's piece, how Avengers Endgame affects Spider-Man Far From Home. So you can check out all that in the show notes. You can find more of all the stories we mentioned on today's podcast linked in the show notes. This podcast, /Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. You can also find it at daily./film.com. And please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, complaints about Chris leaving the theater before the end credit scenes to Peter at /film.com. And please rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we will see you tomorrow. I'm really in disbelief that you actually leave the theater before,
I've said this before. It shouldn't be that shocking.
Maybe I thought you were joking. Maybe I thought it was just like a joke.
No.
No?
No. I never lie. I'm always truthful.
Wait, so I'm trying to think of an instance. Has this ever come back to burn you in the butt?
No, because thankfully in our content-driven culture, anytime there's something really important in a end credit scene, it's immediately online somewhere. So a website like Collider will be like, here's what happens in the post-credit scene. So, if I need to know, I can always just read those descriptions. And, I eventually...
Yeah, but that's the best way to experience the movie, is reading it on Collider.
Yes, exactly. That's how I experience all my movies. I wait for Collider to write them up.